We are live. Let me hop down here. Alright.
Do you want to do the intro?
Yep. Alright, let me just hit record here on the computer. I should plug the sound in on my phone. That would be helpful.
And I don't think you have it on Fish Eye. It's just me and you.
Oh no, I'm at the lost it. How are we looking now?
Probably good. Diggs BTW.
Okay. Okay, I think now we're ready.
Takes us a sec.
No worries.
Live stream always takes a sec to get set up, but now we're ready to go. We'll hit record on here and we'll be good. Okay. Did we cut out again for a second there?
Yeah, just for a sec.
Bit short on one of the chords.
It's probably when you get out of that program.
Well, going back and forth for a minute. Okay, we're good to go. All right, everyone, welcome to the Lofty Lifestyles podcast. We're sitting here with Braden Fuller. We've got a pretty cool show today. Braden's got some really unique experiences, especially for someone his age. Just got back from the Middle East, has spent a ton of time abroad, ton of time outside of Utah, and we're pretty much going to listen to him tell his experiences here. We've got a few questions for him. A little bit of background, he grew up with me and Jay, and we have no idea actually what he does in the Middle East, so we're as excited as everyone else is to learn. So we've got a pretty good show, and we're excited to have you here with us.
Cool, glad to be here.
Okay, so just starting off, just tell us a little bit about what you do, who you are, and kind of why you got into what you're into right now.
Sure. So I served my LDS mission in Ethiopia, and while I was over there, got really interested. There was a lot of political things going on in Ethiopia at the time. The government was kind of teetering a little bit. There had been kind of one faction of the government had been in power for 30 some odd years, and there was a lot of youth movements. People were really upset about what was going on. And so that was kind of, even though as a missionary I wasn't involved in those kind of things, I got really interested because people's lives were being affected a lot. And I thought, okay, people really care about this kind of stuff. And the state of someone's government really affects how well their life is lived. And that's something that I decided I felt passionate about. I would say that's probably one of the passions of my life is understanding how government affects your life, you know what I mean, and your quality of life. And so when I came back, I decided to study at BYU, and I studied chemistry for a year because I thought I'll be a doctor. I was terrible at chemistry.
Hang on, we lost our recording here.
Okay.
Okay, we're back.
There we go, okay. Terrible at chemistry, and so after a year I was like, okay, this is going to work. So I took some Arabic classes and decided, okay, I'm actually pretty good at learning languages, and I really like this whole political thing. So I decided to do a degree in Middle Eastern Studies and Arabic language, which is what I graduated in at BYU. Spent some time over in the Middle East studying during that degree as well. And then I got a job.
I think it's this.
Sorry, our audio's cutting in and out here. We're
No
just going to
worries.
take a quick second to troubleshoot it.
There we go, maybe it's that one.
Okay, I think we should be good now. That might have just been a little loose.
There we go.
Okay, anyways, back up. So you studied chemistry for a year, decided it wasn't for you,
Yeah.
went and got a little bit more involved in Arabic.
Yeah, so I had, because in Ethiopia I had learned Amharic, which is kind of like Portuguese to Spanish, so this Amharic language is to Arabic, right? So I took some Arabic classes thinking, okay, since I already kind of know Amharic, maybe this will be easy. So I studied it, and it wasn't easy. Arabic's really, really difficult. but decided I really loved it. Got really interested in the politics of the Middle East. I mean, Middle Eastern politics is obviously very interesting since 9/11, and before that, and then there was this period, 2011, 2012, the Arab Spring period, which is where a lot of dictatorships, we'll call them, were kind of overthrown after being in power for decades. And so, like, studying politics as they happened was really interesting to me. So I spent some time in Jordan as part of the BYU program, some time in Israel, Palestine, studying the conflict there, and during that time I got a job. I actually was on an airplane and just met this guy who was really interesting to me. He was flying to Somalia, and he was doing data collection for a political risk consulting firm. And I was like, I want to do that. That's really cool. So I actually took his information, and when I graduated 2 years later, I called him. And I said, hey, man, I want a job. And he's like, I got this thing for you. So I went out and worked for him. Worked for that company for a while. Came back, got a job in D.C., and then I currently work for the Armed Conflict Location Event Data Project, or ACLED, where I am a senior researcher on conflict in Ethiopia and Yemen. And have studied those conflicts in really, really deep detail. And kind of the angle that we take and the job that I take is understanding conflict in its real form, which is as a competition. There we go. That little cord seems to be giving us problems.
Yeah, we've got a little bit of a
short somewhere.
Yeah, it's that cord here. Okay, bear with us. We might just have to fight it here for a few minutes.
But what's nice is these are, even though the live stream's happening, we go back and
You can
edit
edit
everything.
it.
Yeah,
Cool.
editable.
Yeah. So anyways, yeah, so what the organization I work for now, we take an angle of understanding conflict as a competition between what we call elite actors in the state, which is very different from people who, for example, have theories of conflict. It's a very academic type of job, because a lot of people will have, you take a theory and you try to prove that theory true or false. And there's a lot of theories out there that say, okay, it's climate change that's causing the Middle East conflicts, right? And I mean, or they say, it's this and that, name your thing. It's Islam, it's the religion that's causing the conflict or whatever. And my organization says, no, it's competition between elite actors, which I believe in, so this is why I work for them.
Yeah.
So yeah, but along the way, I've always done a lot of studying about Islam and the religions of the Middle East and things like that. So there's things that I've come and become a real expert in order to provide. My job description is mostly to do research for this company, but our clients are people that I work for directly. Generally include governments, or I've worked for the German government, I worked for the U.S. government several times, the State Department. But it could also include just like normal companies, like MTN is a very well-known telecom company. I did some research for them in South Sudan. And so, it's research, but it's in the context of understanding why conflicts happen and why government breaks down and why government doesn't fulfill its function as it's supposed to, and how that leads to armed conflict and specifically violence.
That's crazy.
Okay, so there's like a million things we could talk about from what you just said right
Sure.
there. So I want to back up a little bit. So our podcast, we talk a lot about lifestyle, and especially want to focus on action steps that people can take, whether they're not satisfied with their current job or whether they want to, improve their lives, whatever way. So I want to back up to you being on an airplane back from Ethiopia, making what seems to be a very crucial connection in your life,
Yeah.
and then acting upon that. How did that happen? Were you sitting by him on the plane and just chatting with him, or kind of walk us through that thought process on how you actually ended up on the phone with that guy asking for a job 2 years later?
Sure. I mean, you could say it was a bit of luck in that he was sitting next to me and that we ended up talking, but I mean, I would say that what led me to the current career that I'm in is that I devour the news in the Middle East. I read everything. There's not a news article. Like, I spend hours in my week on my own free time reading every news article published by every major news agency in the Middle East in Arabic and in English.
Okay.
And so it really doesn't take that long before you're like an expert, right? You know? And it's not like information, like I don't need to go and read the CIA, secret files about the Middle East to know what's going on. People know what's going on. Like, conflict is not a secret thing. And certain, intelligence reports or whatever, like, all it is just combined information, but you can get that information yourself.
Because they're having to get intelligence reports from somewhere.
Exactly.
Right?
And like I said, like in today's things, like there's a lot of false information out there, there's a lot of bad information, but if you can understand, okay, this guy is this, and he believes this because of his political association with this guy, and they're backed by this guy's money, I mean, it all comes together pretty easily, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so that's what I would say, like what really led me to this career was that, like I said, like I just read the news, every newspaper article. It doesn't matter like if I think it's total baloney or whatever, which there is a lot. But you have to understand, like, even, like what's more important than the news is like what people believe. And if people are reading that newspaper, they believe on that and they may act on that. So
Right. So it doesn't matter if it's true. If it's going to be acted upon, you have to treat it seriously.
Exactly. So prior to sitting next to that guy on the plane, I was reading all that stuff, which led to that conversation on the plane. And he was like, hey, you kind of know your stuff. Like, who do you work for? And I was like, I don't work for anyone. I just read the newspaper.
I read a lot of newspapers.
But I read a lot of newspapers and Facebook posts. And you go, you'll notice, like, hey, this kid on Facebook is, like, really organizing some youth
Something,
movement.
yeah.
I'm going to follow him on Facebook and watch what he posts. You know what I mean? And it takes a lot of dedication in that, like, you really just have to spend hours on the computer just reading, you know what I mean? But the more you read, the more you know, and then you have to critically think about it. And then, so yeah, that led me to that conversation, and then he was impressed with what I'd figured out, and yeah, it kind of led to the job that I ended up getting. So,
And with your avid search for knowledge on papers and I'm sure books and things, this is a curiosity question, but who gives a better, like, you read stuff in Islamic and you read stuff in American papers. What do you think? Is it biases both ways?
yeah, I mean, like, there's always these conversations that people have about the media has failed us, or the media is biased or whatever. But I mean, like, I have to laugh about that sometimes. Like, the media does what it's supposed to do, and it's sell itself. You know what I mean? People read what's written, right? And so, like, if you write something and someone reads it and they like it, then you did your job, right?
Right.
So, do I think media needs to have, like, its own unbiased things? Like, yeah. And there is some great media outlets out there that do a good job. But I would say there is not an organization. Because, like, papers are written by journalists, and every journalist has a background, and every journalist has information that he knows and that he doesn't know. And so there's going to be bias in everything. But what you really need to do is you need to really intake both sides and understand, okay, these English language papers from the American side are saying this, and it's because they got the information from the army or whatever, right? But then these papers in Arabic or whatever, I mean, it could be whatever language or could be wherever, like, they got the information from this guy who has this angle and he believes this, and this is why this is affecting him, right? And so, like, I wouldn't ever say, like, like, actually I completely, like, this is something our organization also says too, is like a lot of people will denounce people as terrorists, right? And terrorist is a big word, but actually, like, who is a terrorist? You know what I mean? Like what makes someone a terrorist?
Because depending on your view.
Yeah, are you a freedom fighter or a terrorist, right?
A terrorist, yeah.
So I mean, like, actually, personally, in my own life, I will never use the word terrorist to describe an organization or any person, because it oversimplifies a problem. And any government, like, for example, Ethiopia just announced 2 different organizations in the country, which, to be fair, are perpetrating a lot of violence against pretty innocent people. They labeled them terrorist organizations, but I feel like that's very unhelpful, right? And it all comes from this bias where you're trying to basically shut their point of view out. I'm not saying that we should be reading things from Al-Qaeda or whatever, but what I'm saying is there's a point of view that you should understand.
Yeah. Because there's a large group of people that have that
Yeah.
point of view.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's massively interesting. And so when you got this job, and then what did it look like getting into that job?
So, I mean, like working in this first organization that I worked for, like we were doing a lot of data collection. So basically what we would do is we would have, it was kind of funny, we would have like 300 tablets, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we just pull them out of a suitcase and we would just hire people like crazy. And we would we would do a statistical sample of an area that we're looking to get the information from, depending on the information. So I first started working in Egypt, and did all the Yemenis there. Questions about food security. We were doing a report on whether or not people had enough food to last for the next 2 months. There was some conflict going on. People were going to need food stores, and the World Food Program was interested in knowing how much food people had and how critical things were going to get over the next 2 months. Did people have a month's worth of food? Did they have a week worth? How long until people start dying of hunger, basically? Mm-hmm. So we just started dialing around numbers, and so a lot of that was very technical. We had, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of answers. We had an app that we built that would basically help us record the answers and then do the data. And then we wrote a report, basically, and basically that's what the job was, copy and paste, but given a different context. So we did some research in Somalia, mapping different political alliances. We did, like I said, in Sudan, we did some stuff with the telecom, stuff like that. So
Wow.
Yeah, things that I never thought that would ever be like a tactic employed in that kind of context. And
yeah.
I guess that kind of maybe shows like my naivety on the situation out there, but
it was pretty funny because we did that one because we couldn't go to Yemen because of the situation there. But what we did is we went to it was like a scam center, to be honest. I mean, it was like people were calling people in Florida trying to sell them knee braces, and we're like, we need to buy you all out for a week and borrow your stuff. So, yeah, I mean, if you have the technology, it'll call anywhere. You know what I mean? And then we had this random number generator that would just sit and spit out phone numbers and
just cold call
people, yeah.
So with that information you collect, then what? I mean, obviously they use that data to drive decision-making going forward, but as far as your organization, do they compile that data and sell it to different organizations, or do they...
Yes and no. So it depends on the client and the contract. So each contract will have a client that will specify whether they own the data or we own the data. And if we own the data, we could reuse that data for other purposes. In my current job, we own our data.
Okay.
But in other jobs that I've worked for, and I also do some consulting on the side, and in those jobs, generally, I do not own the data. So technically, that data belongs to someone else. I can't use it for another purpose. Sometimes we do, in the first job that I worked for, we did a little less of this, and where like we would basically pass the data over to someone who would then analyze it. But in my current job, we keep our data and we do in-house analysis, which is actually more of what I do now. I've moved beyond like the data collection role, but I do a lot of analysis where what you then do is you take the information that you know about a location, about whatever situation or organization you're researching, and then you basically take the data and you write a report based on, statistics I would be very careful with, especially in the Middle East. They definitely lie to you all the time. But you can use it to prove some points and to understand things that maybe you weren't quite sure of, or you can get someone's opinion on something or whatever. So writing those reports, and we'll produce those reports again, like you said, to drive decision making, drive policy. A lot of times, like the last group of work that I did was for the State Department. They're talking about imposing sanctions on certain Ethiopian individuals, restricting visas. Like they try to decide, like, okay, should people involved in armed conflict be able to visit the United States and buy a house in Virginia? Like, should that be allowed? You know what I mean? And in some cases the answer is no, and in some cases the answer is, okay, yeah, it's probably not this guy's fault or whatever, so.
Interesting. Yeah, I think we see the side like, okay, we're imposing these sanctions, we're doing these things based on policy, but we have no idea where that, where the data behind those decisions come from. We just speculate, we think maybe Ethiopia's got a bunch of bad dudes, so we're going to restrict visas. So
yeah,
it's cool to hear that perspective on
and where
these
that
big picture things.
yeah, the big
Yeah.
picture comes from
Yeah,
at the
there's
micro level.
a lot of work that goes into it. That's for sure. It's not these decisions are not made over. Although sometimes, I mean, the frustrating part is sometimes you'll write a nice report, you'll come up with the data, you'll write something, you'll pass it to the organization that hired you, and then they'll come out with something that you're like, what? That is not what I said.
Really?
Like, and sometimes it's political. Sometimes they'll hire multiple organizations to do the same research.
So if they get different answers, then
Sometimes they get different answers. Yeah, I mean, it just depends. I mean, these are very, very, very complex problems that we're trying to solve.
Right.
I mean, it's like world peace, and like it's not something that you get right, and
like
it's
a
not
whole country's like hunger,
Yeah, I mean, it's not like that's just like what we're doing. We're in charge of that, and it's our responsibility. We're just a tiny piece of it. But, certainly sometimes you'll give an answer, and for some reason the organization will not take your report as true. I guess that would be one of the major like challenges of my job too, is that sometimes they need a report from someone like me to fulfill some kind of a check box, you know what I mean? Like okay, in order to do this, you need to sanction a study. You need to pay for a study. A professional researcher needs to investigate this and give you a report. I'll hand that report in, and I would say not all of my reports are not. I wouldn't say even half. More than half are very useful, I'm sure, but I would say a good number of them probably never get opened.
And more just they already knew what they were going to do
They
before
knew what
they
they
got
were
the
going to
report.
do. Yeah, and that's politics for you. It's
Yeah,
a game. You know what I mean?
right.
It's a game, and
and if they need that, they can call it and say, "We got this."
yeah,
we
right,
have it.
Right.
right, yeah. So that's a big challenge, and that's why I actually moved from my one job to the other one, because I felt like in my other job I was in a point where a lot of my reports I felt were very good, very informative, and then I would see the decisions being made, and I was like, "You didn't read the report, did you?" And I honestly think they didn't. But in the company that I work for now, I feel like we have clients where they are reading our reports, and decisions are being made based on the quality of the research that we do, which is nice.
I feel like
Making a
that's
big
a
impact.
that's a sneak peek into how government works. I think at that higher level, they do what they have to sell public opinion, and then they
Right.
just go where they're going to go.
Yeah.
So, well, that's cool. So, I mean, your work is fascinating. The places you go are fascinating. I want to talk a little bit about that now. Like, tell us about the places you've been. Favorite places. I mean, obviously, the general conception of the Middle East is like a very volatile, potentially dangerous area.
And you've spent majority of your young teens in that. I mean, when did you got there at 19, 18?
Yeah, 18, yeah.
So just tell us about a little bit of your favorite places.
Yeah, sure.
Just places you've enjoyed being.
I mean, I spent a lot of time in Ethiopia, and Ethiopia will always have like this place where we'll call it a special place in my heart. Warm and fuzzies, right?
Right.
It's incredibly frustrating. The politics there are difficult,
Mhm.
and they make people's lives difficult. And so it's an incredibly challenging environment for work, I would say. It's a bit challenging to live there, depending on where you are. I mean, a lot of people think, there's, and we'll go to the extreme edge. People that don't know much about the Middle East will say, okay, they're all living in the sand or whatever. But
Right.
the Middle East is incredibly diverse.
Mhm.
There's some pretty amazing areas. People that live in places much nicer than in the U.S. And then in Ethiopia, the same thing. The capital of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, you can get frozen yogurt if you want to, or you can go eat dinner on the top of a skyscraper if you like. Just an hour from there, you can visit a family who didn't have enough to eat, and they live in a mud hut, and the cows are in there with them. And so, you know what I mean? It's just the diversity. I would say what makes the Middle East and areas of East Africa really interesting are that they're just really incredibly diverse, and I really like that. Of course, like at home here in Utah, I grew up around nature, and so like my favorite places in the Middle East are places with a lot of nature.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So like I really like I went to this Yemeni island called Socotra, which is an amazing place, probably my favorite place in the world. It's just, I mean, the whole place looks like it was out of Dr. Seuss, like the trees are crazy and animals and stuff. And so yeah, I mean, but also like the urban centers. I think one thing that I have learned to appreciate that I didn't grow up with is that places like Cairo in Egypt are like this place has been inhabited by people since the pharaohs. You know what I mean? Since the ancient Egyptians, and like it shows. Like there are walls built on walls on top of houses on top of other houses that have been there for thousands of years. And there's also kind of like a real magical vibe of a Middle East city. You know what I mean? In the sense that it's like, it's very enchanting, to be honest, in that it has these things that you wouldn't find in a place like America where things are new. You know what I mean? Things are so old over there and things are so ancient. And the political troubles that we see as Americans, we view the Middle East as a volatile region, as you said, and it can be. But it really is like location dependent, you know, and like places in Cairo can be the most peaceful place on the earth, you know, like right next to the River Nile. It can be very peaceful and incredibly, like I said, enchanting. So yeah, I would say like I think my favorite places are still like these really places with incredible nature. Places like Ethiopia has huge mountains and things that I love to visit. But I would say that I've also come to really enjoy these urban places that are like huge ancient cities and places where, like I said, like these political problems are they're viewed by the residents as a little bump in the road, whereas we see them as like the defining moment in the history. Egyptians wouldn't quite say that. They would say, okay, yeah, we're having a little problem right now, but Cairo has been the center of civilization forever. You know what I mean? So
a little conflict isn't really going to set them back too much to where they came from.
Yeah, so I mean, places like even like Iraq, you know, like which I haven't been to Iraq actually, but what we know about Iraq is that we fought a war there. What Iraqis know about Iraq is that the Mesopotamia was there, and that, you know, like the Babylonian and all these civilizations have been there for thousands of years, and like this is just a very modern thing that's happening to them, and that it will pass, and that things will go back to normal later.
That's really interesting. That's a super interesting way to look at it from the inside.
Yeah, and you know, I'm sure, like we talked about in the newspaper, we only read the one side that's kind of presented to us, and we have no idea the perspective that your, you know, average, you know, Iranian citizen is thinking about these different conflicts. So
yeah. I think a lot of people have very nuanced views. A lot of people will say like, oh, do you have problems in the Middle East? Do people hate Americans? And I think that's a very, like I said, like
too general.
That's boiling things, you know, way down. Like no, people in Somalia understand that American people don't want to kill Somali people. It's governments and it's political, and they understand these problems, I would say, even better than Americans, because they've lived them. They've lived these they understand that, okay, what happens between politics is not necessarily a problem between two people. You know what I mean? And so, like, do I have problems as an American in certain places of the world? Like, yes, but for political reasons. It's not like someone tries to kill me in the street because they think I'm an American. You know, like, it's not. It's more complicated than that, you know?
Right. So here in a sec, we want to kind of move on to some of your outside of work lifestyle things. But before we do that, just because you have a very unique perspective that I think most people don't really will ever be privileged enough to have. You know, you first went to the Middle East. You went, before serving a mission, you went out to Ethiopia, right?
Yeah.
And then you came back. How old were you when you first had a job out in the Middle East?
Let's see. That would have been 24, 23.
That's crazy. I mean, people listening to this, put yourself in that situation where you're 23, you're flying out to the Middle East, somewhere you've never been before, somewhere you're hoping you're an expert on because you're going there to be the expert. You know, if you're older than 23, I mean, were you capable of that when you were 23? And if you know, you are 23 or you're coming up to 23, like, you know, put yourself in that perspective. What are you doing to make sure you're prepared for life when, you know, the random guy you met offers you like the coolest job you could ever imagine? Because, you know, if you wouldn't have done those things to really be prepared to, you know, read up on what he was going out to do, you know, you'd probably been hit in the face pretty hard out there.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But anyway, so going back to my point, just from your perspective, what is it exactly? And this might be a very narrow question that isn't really answerable in this time frame we have, but just from your perspective, what is it that's causing conflicts? We talked about competing elite players, but why is it happening? Maybe my question's a little vague, but
Yeah, I mean, like, if I could answer that question, then we may be able to solve one piece, right? Like
here we go.
We sit down and solve it right here. Yeah, I mean, like, there are a lot there. I would say that, like, the thing that you need to remember about conflict is that it's never simple. You know what I mean? And I think that's true here in Wellsville. We have people fighting over water shares, or they're fighting over certain pieces of land. But it all kind of comes down to, like I said, like my company and what I believe is the root cause of conflict is competing elites. And what this means is that there are certain, well, if you control something, you can get money from it. And if you can get money from it, you can control more things. You know what I mean? And so that's the basis of this, is that competition over resources, competition over certain, the ability to tax a certain population. I mean, like, why else would you want to control an area, right? Like, and that really is what causes conflict. And then, of course, that again is like being very, very oversimplified, because you have things like in Ethiopia, like the big issue right now is ethnic conflict. Like, certain members of one tribe are fighting another tribe. But again, like, people who boil it down and say this is a tribal conflict, like, that's also very wrong, because, like, people don't kill each other naturally. Like, that's not a natural thing for people to do. But they do fight over resources. They fight over water. They fight over mines. They fight over the ability to tax a whole group of. I mean, if you could tax 500 farmers, that's a lot of money. You know what I mean? And people believe that they have the right to rule certain places. And so, yeah, I mean, like, there's issues. I mean, it's super, super, super complex and super deep. In the Middle East, colonialism was a big deal. A lot of the lines were drawn by the British and other European organizations, and then America was involved as well. And, like, a lot of things were imposed on people. And if you kind of swing that into this context of competing elites, you've got elites who were being basically backed by certain members of the U.S. during this whole competition during the Cold War. That's where Al-Qaeda was created, obviously, the Taliban and things like this. And so, I mean, it's incredibly complex, but my belief is that really, to understand conflict, you need to understand who's competing and why they're competing. And then you can start to work into how this could be potentially solved. But, I mean, have I solved the conflict yet? Like, the answer is no. Right. So a lot of this is very hypothetical. But what you can do is you can understand what's going to happen, why it's going to happen, and then you can help people get out of the way. And that's really what we would try to do. But we're I mean, even academia, who's been studying conflict for a really long time, it's kind of, I mean, it's like, like back when they were just inventing the first things of medicine, like they were doing, I don't know a lot about medicine, but, like, I know they were, like, cutting people open and bloodletting them, like bleeding people out, saying this is going to solve it. Academia has to go through the same things with conflict, you know what I mean? And, like, the Middle East and stuff like that is, we're new. We make a lot of really bad assumptions and bad mistakes
about that area.
About the area, but about what conflict is and why it's happening and stuff like that. And things have gotten much better.
And tell us real quick, we were talking before we got on here about one of the things that I think was a good perspective shift for me was just taking the trash out, your essential services.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like, what people really want, and what they want is for their kids to be able to go outside and play and be safe. You know what I mean? And they want their trash taken out. And if they pay for electricity, they want there to be electricity. You know what I mean? And people need water. And these are all resources, right? And so, like, these are the competition here. And so, like, like places in Yemen, places in Somalia where extremist groups like Al-Qaeda, like Al-Shabaab, which is kind of a version of Al-Qaeda, even Islamic State, although Islamic State is a bit different, they may succeed where a government has failed. You know what I mean? The government may be very neglectful of a certain area of a country, and that certain area of a country has no basic services, has no governance, the governance could be corrupt or something like that. Along comes Al Qaeda, they arm the population, they say, okay, do this, and then they do it, and then all of a sudden Al Qaeda is taking out the trash, they've got electricity, and
People's basic needs.
people's
they're
basic
just
needs are so, you know what I mean? And so there's different levels of governance where, if the governance is really bad, then yeah, like who else do you turn to? And I think like in certain areas of the world, religion plays a big part in this because people understand Islam especially as being kind of a base where they say, okay, the government really sucks, but I know because I have a testimony that Islam is the solution to all things. Therefore, this group that claims to be representing Islam, we'll give
Could
them a
have the
try.
answers.
They could have the answers, right? And I think the same thing would happen here in the United States. The breakdown of the Utah government would end up, the LDS church would take over, and it would probably do a decent job of taking out the trash and charging people for electricity and things like that. You know what I mean? Because it has the resources and the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, that's super interesting. We always talk about like how do these dictators come into power? How do these, seemingly bad ideas, with Al Qaeda, the Taliban, the Islamic State. We wonder how that could have possibly happened, but I think that kind of sums up, or at least gives one little sneak peek into why people
Yeah.
bring those kind of groups to power throughout the world. And
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's incredibly complex and no one has the real answer. But yeah, I mean, these groups, we call them non-state actors or whatever. Like when the government, the state isn't fulfilling its responsibility or it's not doing it good enough. Yeah, I mean, people can, and it's also had me develop a very complicated relationship with democracy because Ethiopia is having an election coming up soon, and there's going to be a lot of violence, and there has been a lot of violence around this election, and it makes you wonder, is this worth it? You know what I mean? Like for what end? Because the government's going to come out and they're going to win, and they may cheat or they may not cheat, and who knows? You know what I mean? But like in the end, are you going to get a better government than others? And so, it's a very complicated situation over there because democracy works well in some contexts, and in other contexts. For example, if everyone votes along their own tribal lines, the biggest tribe wins, right?
right.
So then, if the biggest tribe wins, then where is everyone else, right?
Right.
So yeah,
They're not part of that tribe.
you're not part of the tribe. So do you not get access to? Does your garbage not get taken out, or does your garbage get taken out after the right? So
Right.
it's a really complicated situation.
Well, I think, I'm sure we could sit here and talk about world history for hours, but, I think we're seeing that kind of separation into tribal lines in, our own country here,
Yeah.
in our own state. Things get bitter, but things, you're right. It comes down to who wants the power and what players are at play and who's going to sacrifice what to get there. So,
Yeah.
and it's unfortunate that it ropes, especially in countries like Ethiopia, it's unfortunate that violence ropes in average people that have nothing to do with it. So,
Yeah.
Well, as you're traveling around, I mean, you, for a time, we were talking about as well, you lived on a boat in the Chesapeake. I mean, you've probably spent a lot of time in Cairo and Egypt, a lot of time in tents in random areas of Africa. Tell us a little bit about that lifestyle
Yeah.
and why you've chosen to live, a little different than, say, your average citizen.
Good question. Well, I think I haven't really ever chosen to go out and just it's been part of the job description,
Like you don't find any pure enjoyment being like, this is now.
Oh no, I mean I do. I do. Don't get me wrong. I love traveling. I always have. In certain contexts, it gets pretty tiring. You know what I mean? The whole joy of traveling to see a new place wears off pretty quickly when it's your job.
Yeah, sure.
But I mean, like I said, what I really feel passionate about is this whole governance, understanding wow, why is this place so different than another place? Why does governance work here and fail so miserably here? You know what I mean? And why do these guys have great roads and these guys these roads here suck? You know, why? And traveling to new places allows me to see different contexts and understand those kind of things, and that I still get, like, that will never wear off for me. As far as like traveling, like sleeping in hotels, like what's a Nacho Libre quote, like in a bed by myself for the rest of my life. That's a tough one.
Right.
You know,
No matter how cool the view is out of your window.
yeah, but I mean, I also think I've been always very open to like different, I would say, like alternative modes of living, just that facilitate certain things. Like you mentioned, like I was living in DC, and like rent was just too high. Like it was just too much. Like it wasn't too much for me to pay, but I didn't want to pay it. I didn't feel like giving half my paycheck every month to live in this crappy apartment. So this guy, I got into fishing out there on the Chesapeake, and was going to buy a little inflatable fishing boat. And the guy was like, "I have a sailboat for sale. You want to see it?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I liked it, and I was like, it had a bed and a kitchen. It was like a floating RV, you know?
Yeah.
So I was like, what the heck? Like, I don't know how to sail, but I got enough money to buy this boat. So I bought it, and I'm going to learn how to sail. And
Did you teach yourself how to sail?
I watched a lot of YouTube videos.
Oh, YouTube. You would learn anything on
There's
YouTube.
nothing you can't learn from YouTube. Yeah.
So you fixed it up and you just sailed around?
Sailed around. I lived on an anchor, and then I also rented like a little slip at a dock at this place that had like a Wi-Fi, like a little cabin with Wi-Fi, and then it had like you could hook power. So I had it was cold, and when I first bought them, it was February.
Oh my gosh!
In Maryland, right?
In Maryland, that is on the water.
Yeah, on the water. Yeah, so I like hooked into the power and had a little heater in there. And then later I ended up building I had a solar panel, and ended up like putting lights and stuff. But
there was kind of a whole community.
Yeah,
people
live out there. So it was just something that I actually really enjoyed it. Then Corona started, and I ended up quitting the job in DC and decided it wasn't for me. Not that living on a boat wasn't for me, but the job wasn't for me. Because I definitely would love to live on a boat again.
Yeah.
It was super fun.
You're landlocked here.
Yeah. What do I do?
You can't just go explore.
I know.
Okay, so coronavirus hit. You're back here now in Wellsville, Utah.
Yeah.
If you don't know where Wellsville, Utah is,
Say
you're
northern
not
Utah.
alone. You can just Google it. We're up in northern Utah here. What's next? The foreseeable future here, the next year or so. What travel plans are on the docket? What's coming up in your life?
Sure. So I am currently still employed by ACLED, and I've also picked up another kind of research position at the University of Sussex, which is in England. So I don't think I'll have to be there full time to do that position, but I'll probably end up in England for a while. But I think also next fall, like probably November or so, be back in the Middle East for at least 6 or 7 months to continue the research on these projects that we've been doing. Long-term goals, though, I really wanted to get into political consulting with investment in mind. I'm really interested in economics, and economics and politics obviously are hand in hand.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like you can't have one without the other. I mean, economics is politics. And so I really want to understand that better, because I've really focused on, with my work in armed conflict, focused a lot on the politics of a certain area and less so on the economy. But I really think the economy has a huge, when it boils down to it, that's another basic, people want to be able to move their goods freely, right? And things like that. And so understanding the economic consequences of certain policies and something is what I want to become better at. And I obviously want to apply this political knowledge that I've gained into something like that and move into political consulting to investment firms who want to invest in places like Ethiopia, Egypt, stuff like that. So I think to accomplish that, I've got my eye on some different people that do that already that I've kind of been in contact with, and I'm doing a lot of reading. Again, I think a common theme in my life is like I just try to read everything about it, try to know everything that people know about it. And then I'll start applying to jobs. And who knows? I don't know if I'll succeed or not, but I think if I can build a decent resume and stuff, I'll be able to get a position with something like that. So that's the long-term plan.
That's awesome. Okay, so go ahead.
No,
Sorry.
you're good. And I was going to say, also short term, you're guiding hunts right now.
Yeah. This is just kind of something random. So I just love hunting, love being outdoors. I love nature and stuff like that. So since I already have all the gear, I got I know an outfitter out of Heber City, and just have a couple clients booked this year for a couple weeks hunt. I've one mountain goat hunt in the Uintas that's been booked, and 2 elk hunts, week-long elk hunts that I'll be guiding this fall. So taking a little break from politics in the Middle East and spend some time chasing some elk out there. So
We'll have those links in this. Go get yourself a big game with Braden Fuller.
yeah.
There we go. Well, awesome. I think our time here is kind of coming up. Just in closing, obviously your life has, been kind of a roller coaster as far as the cool things you've done and the places you've been. Any parting advice people looking to, people really want to have these kind of cool opportunities, but have no idea how to get involved, how to start, where to look. What would be your parting advice for someone who's like, I want to go do something cool like that, but don't know where to start?
Sure. I mean, I would say to start where I started. Like a lot of people think like you can, there's like I said like that there's some kind of intelligence that you don't have or some resources you don't have. And that's not true. Like everything's out there. There's the internet. You can read the newspaper that came out in Yemen this morning. I can read it on my phone. You know what I mean? So there's not an information problem. Read everything. You know what I mean? Just like get your hands on anything and everything you can read, and if you do it consistently, and I keep track of all the reading that I do on a spreadsheet. So I read the article, I'll put the title, some notes that I thought about it, and a link. And then later, if I'm like thinking about something, I'll read something else and I'll go, wait a second, I've
thought of that before.
I've thought of this before. I'll go back to that article. You know what I mean, or something. So I would say just read, keep records. And newspaper and journalists, they do incredible work, and I think a lot of people play it down as the media is biased and stuff like that. But you have to understand like why are they biased, and read it and understand that, and then you can get a lot of information from someone who's putting out a lot of baloney, even just by understanding why they're putting the baloney out. You know what I mean? So.
Just seeing behind the curtain.
Yeah. See why are they doing this? Like why do they believe? Because people don't write things and think I just wrote a false news article. Ha ha ha. Like they believe what they wrote, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Why? Yeah.
And last thing I want to know is, do you have any cool story, like getting chased, shot at, even going into a restaurant and renting all the people there, not renting them all out, to work for the evening to cold call. That's
hiring people. Yeah, that was fun. An experience. I mean, there's a lot, but
sure.
I think one relevant to Corona that really put me in a good pickle this year was I went to Yemen, and Yemen has 2 or 3 governments right now, depending on who you talk to. And I flew into one government and got a visa from one. I had the proper visa. I went, did my thing, and when I tried to leave, I was flying back to Dubai, and they said, "Oh, you can't land in Dubai without a COVID test." And I said, "Lovely. Where do I get a COVID test?" Like, "Oh, you can't get one in this. This government doesn't control a hospital with a COVID test. You got to go to another one." So I landed.
Didn't have a visa for another one.
Right. So I landed in this other same country, but different place, and they're like, where did you come from? And I was like, just there. And they're like, yeah. So I was detained in a hotel for like 7 or 8 days, which I could say was pretty boring, but then I made really good friends with a couple of the people there, and they ended up showing me, like, we snuck out at night, and they showed me some really cool things in their town.
That's pretty cool.
So, and then finally ended up getting the COVID test, and after a lot of arguing in airport and being, for some reason, accused over and over of being Lebanese. Don't ask me, do I look Lebanese? I guess I could, but anyways, yeah. So ended up getting back to Dubai, but that was probably the hairiest situation I was in this year. That one was a tough one, being stuck in Yemen for 7 or 8 days. And actually, the day that I flew into that other government, a missile hit the airport that I was supposed to go into. And so that could have been real bad.
Yeah.
So that was, yeah.
So you got some blood.
Yeah, if you remember, I don't know if you saw the news. It hit the Aden airport was hit by a missile, and I flew into another one, a different one. But like right when I landed, everyone was freaking out, and I could like, what's going on? But So, anyways, crazy stuff.
You hadn't read that article yet.
I don't know. It just happened. I was in the air.
That is awesome, and it's so good talking with you. We'll definitely, this won't be the last time we talk. We're going to talk with the pyramids behind us in one of our.
Let's do it.
You're going to definitely take us around that area.
But okay, I think we're wrapping up for the day. Braden, thanks a ton. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
You live a really cool life, and I think people listening will, hopefully be motivated to go out and elevate their lives as well. To those listening, thank you, and we look forward to the next episode.
Yeah, don't forget, join the club, break the mold, and live a lofty lifestyle like Braden.
Thank you. Okay,
See when you talk after?
Yeah,
You're
it's
like,
crazy.
whoa.
Yeah. It's like stepping off an ice cube.
Yeah, your feet are like...